you listen to reason? Will you open your eyes? It's a wonder what you'll find with an open mind. You may be surprised. Yeah, gotta get away from this illusion for the sake of the world. This delusion, it's gotta go.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. It is Sunday, May 25th, 2014. I'm Matt Dillahunty. This is Don Baker.
Hey.
It's been 7 months
Seven months
the two of
since
us
we've been on together. Holy
Yeah.
moly.
Yeah, you couldn't avoid me any longer.
Right.
Eventually it had to happen. So welcome everybody. As most of you probably know by now, this is a live public access television program out of Austin, Texas, and we take live calls and ask questions and answer questions and try to get to what you believe and why. And maybe we'll agree, maybe we won't. Who knows? But one of the things that we do from time to time is some of the hosts actually bring in a topic to discuss, and Don is our resident topic maestro. So we're going to talk today a little bit about the Dark Ages before
That's
we
right.
take calls.
That's
Cool.
right.
How have you been, by the way?
Good, good. It's been a long time since I've seen you. You've been running around doing debates and things. Good for you.
Yeah, I've got a debate coming up this Saturday in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm debating Cy ten Bruggencate.
Who's that?
Some guy.
Some guy, okay.
No, it's the topic is it reasonable to believe that a God exists? And Cy is a presuppositionalist, and I'm not going to bore anybody with what all of that means. But it's sponsored by recoveringfromreligion.org, which is a great group that I do work with and promote. One of the things that Recovering from Religion kind of is their bread and butter is that as people depart religion, as people leave different religions, they often need a place to land.
Yeah.
They need, a community, and
some
some
detox,
of them,
huh?
some of them may need help and assistance, and whether it be, they've lost their entire social network, or
Oh yeah, that's a
I
big
mean,
issue.
could have lost jobs or family or whatever else. But not everybody who comes out of religion comes out with, thank God I'm free at last, and now I can just go live my life. For some people, it's tougher than others.
Yeah.
And so Recovering from Religion does a really good job of that, as does the Clergy Project, which is another group.
specialized, right?
And Clergy Project is devoted to current or former clergy persons who are non-believers. And we know that there are many of them still standing in the pulpit preaching who do not believe.
Yeah.
And thanks to my twin brother, Jerry DeWitt, who I love dearly, who was the first person in the Clergy Project to get rid of his anonymity and actually speak out and wrote a book and stuff. And so as the world changes around us, we need more and more different types of atheist groups and communities to meet the
Approaches
needs
and viewpoints
yeah.
and ways of debating, all sorts of things, right?
It's not just the bald, bearded white guys club anymore.
Right.
Bitching about religion. Now there's a whole lot
Some
more.
guys
to
with
it.
hair every once in a while.
Every
right?
now and then.
What do you
But
know?
why don't you tell us about the Dark Ages?
Okay. Well, I've been doing a long series on the failures of Christianity, and today is the 24th failure show. So
Let's not call it a failure show.
a failure show.
A show about failures.
About failures, right? So, there's a lot of failures, and it begs the question of, if your God's on your side, why are you having so much trouble with this? I saw a bumper sticker, and it's kind of based on this wonderful quote from Ruth Hermantz Green. She was an author of the Born Again Skeptic's Guide to the Bible in 1997, so it's an earlier New Atheist. Her quote was, "There was a time when religion ruled the world. It was known as the Dark Ages." And that's kind of the gist of the show. The Middle Ages was a period between the fall of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance from the 5th to the 15th century, also known as the Dark Ages. Some of the big events, Constantine becomes Roman emperor and Christianizes the declining empire. And even though the empire was in decline, Christianity was there and largely unopposed and had all sorts of power for 10 plus centuries. So there's this wonderful Bible quote, "From their fruits ye shall know them." So what did they do with their power? Completely unopposed, what sorts of wonderful things did Christians do?
Isn't this the period of time where there was just massive scientific discovery and improved healthcare and just...
No, not that.
Okay.
Not that. They did do some good art and architecture, but that was kind of bribes, I think, for the purgatory. The artists could go through purgatory and
selling indulgences.
Indulgences, right? Yeah. That was another thing. So nothing particularly great came out of the Dark Ages. So I want to look at three.
I wonder if that's why we call them the Dark
Ages. That's right. I want to look at three faith-based initiatives of the Dark Ages. I wanted the suppression of pagans and heretics, the Crusades, and the destruction of knowledge. And there are many more events. Of course, this is like 10 centuries. Good grief! There's lots of stuff, but I wanted to point these out. The suppression of pagans and heretics. Well, Rome was a melting pot of conquered cultures in the heyday, and it had a mixture of religions. Those that were non-Christian were kind of branded as pagan or lumped together altogether. And the religious tolerance that existed under most of the Roman rule vanished at the end there and under Constantine and those. A later emperor, Theodosius, stepped up the destruction of pagan practices and buildings starting in 383. Constantine and Theodosius were considered godly emperors serving the church and crushing its enemies.
Because that sounds really, let's crush our enemies.
Right.
In the love of Jesus.
In the love of Jesus, right. So around this time we had the Council of Nicaea canonizing certain texts and practices, making a whole lot of Christians heretics because they had so many variations of Christianity and only one kind of came out of there. And so these Christian minorities ended up being persecuted as well. So thus began a centuries-long persecution, torture, execution of non-Christians. St. Thomas Aquinas summed up the standard medieval position as when he declared that the obstinate heretics deserved not only to be separated from the church, but also eliminated from the world by death. And so this is what happens when you have church and state mixed. So unfortunately for Christianity, suppression was a failure. The truth really has nothing to fear from alternative views, but dogma requires active suppression of those views in order to keep the dogma alive. Murder and torture may allow you to get your way, but it has nothing to do with love or treating human life as sacred, which is a bit of modern propaganda. Ultimately, the suppression failed. Many of the variations of Christianity and other religions still endure today, such as Zoroastrianism and Islam. Those are other religions that were persecuted but made it out. A couple of them didn't make it out, Catharism and Mithraism. Is the world better without them? I'm not so sure. So many people today view the separation of church and state as a hallmark of a civilized society. So it seems like they've kind of lost that battle in the long run. The Crusades is the next one I want to talk about. The Crusades was a set of religious military campaigns initially to take back the Holy Lands, Jerusalem, from the Muslims. There were 6 thrusts over 200 years from 1095 to 1291, and hundreds of thousands of Christians became crusaders and were given plenary indulgences by the Catholic Church in compensation. And this is sort of a little bit more than a pat on the head. It was kind of a forgiving of sins and of penance and these sorts of things that I'm sure a lot of the folks thought it was a free trip to heaven. So there's a little debate about what that really meant. They killed those that got in their way, including the Cathars, the Jews, the Byzantines, the Muslims, pretty much anybody. And they sacked and pillaged, and eventually, 200 years or so, they did capture Jerusalem. Well, the Crusades were kind of a failure as well, even though they got the Holy Lands. They had a lot of poor military coordination due to the feudal cultural differences of the different sort of tribes, effectively, shifting allegiances between them, and aristocrat noblemen desiring of fame, wealth, and glory, not wanting to take orders from other people. So the banner of God didn't make them an effective military force, and it took 200 years to do this. It also shows how wealth and power are a driving force of Christianity. Think of the Holy Lands as a pilgrimage moneymaker. Think of a Jesus Disneyland. You know, they're going to extract money out of the pilgrims that are going to go there and you know, check out all the wonderful things in the Holy Land. And so this shows how Christianity is placing material things above human life. And there was a motto during one of the Crusades: kill them all, the Lord will recognize his own. And ironically, now the Holy Lands are under Israel, under primarily Jewish rule. So that kind of ended up doing something completely different. The next thing I want to talk about briefly is the destruction of knowledge. Now, book burning is not necessarily a religious thing, although religions tend to do this, or have done this, as a way of suppressing heretical ideas through the centuries. Book burnings in the Dark Ages were just another way to destroy the pagan cultures or the heretic cultures to make room for Christianity. And often, instead of just burning books, why not burn entire libraries? And why not burn the people that wrote the books or regarding the books? That sort of thing. So that happened too. So we have the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria was the greatest warehouse of knowledge in the ancient world. It was a cultural and educational hub open to all from the, let's see, in the 3rd century, no, it was created in the 3rd century before the Common Era and lasted until 391 in the Common Era, so 600 years or so, when it was destroyed by Christians. Emperor Theodosius, again mentioned, issued a decree banning all religions other than Christianity, and Christian groups under the Bishop Theophilus burnt the library in 391, thus ending the library as a public institution. Later, one of the curators and scholars and philosopher Hypatia was murdered. She was also associated with the library, and murdered, mutilated, and dismembered by Christian mob in 451. And thus she became the first martyr to science. There's another little vignette that's kind of, I think, instructional, and that is there was this document found that was the Archimedes palimpsest. It was a document originally contained a number of works of Archimedes. Archimedes lived in 200 BCE, and some of his works were copied along the way, and this particular copy was made in 950 AD in Byzantium. The Christians got a hold of this thing and said, "Oh, paper!" And so they scraped off the ink and washed it clean by monks in 1229 for reuse, and they used it as a liturgical text for religious services. And this document was discovered in this last century, and the original content was reconstructed using modern techniques, different types of light waves and these sorts of things. And they found in it all sorts of interesting works of Archimedes, one of which was, this is the only copy. And this copy is called the Method of Mechanical Theorems, which is really the initial discovery of integral calculus. So imagine back in 200 BCE, integral calculus was invented, not in the 17th century when we think it was. And if we had only, if anybody along the way had any smarts or knew what they really had in their pocket, how much better the world would be with this thing. But yet it was sort of savaged for the paper that it was contained on. So that's kind of, I think, in one little vignette sums up the whole mindset of this. Get rid of all the old knowledge because it's not good for Jesus or whatever. So the destruction of knowledge is a failure too. Everybody is poorer for that, and the suppression of truth doesn't succeed in the long run. Eventually it comes out. And it shows the evil nature of Christianity. If knowledge and truth are at odds with Christianity, then Christianity is clearly not the truth and is a false religion. Very simple. So when Christianity ruled the world, it really showed its true nature. People were persecuted, knowledge was destroyed, wealth and power mattered over all else, and it was the Dark Ages. And that's a failure of Christianity.
All right, and that's the 24th
That's the
failure of
24th
Christianity.
little failure, yeah.
The thing is, I don't know that there's a limit to the number of failures that we can discover. So it's a good thing you're keeping count.
Right.
Because you never know.
Might be at it a while.
It could be, we get to like, this is the 486th and final failure of Christianity. Only because Christianity no longer exists. It stopped failing.
It stopped failing, right.
On October 4th. Thank you so much.
Okay,
cool.
Let's take some calls.
Yeah, let's get to some calls. We got Kyle in Georgetown. How are you?
Hi, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, I'm a longtime fan of the show. It's the first time I've ever called in.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I had a question. I actually had a question about miracles and technology, but I also had another question about joining the Austin atheist community also. But
I can't answer the second one.
Okay.
Because of rules of the TV show.
Yeah.
But you can check out our website and get information there.
All right, I appreciate it.
So let's go with the miracle question.
Okay. So there's a quote by I think he's either a scientist or
He's a science fiction writer, Arthur C. Clarke.
Okay. And what did he say about I actually heard it discussed first on this show.
Yeah.
And
sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, I believe, is that's the gist of it anyway.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a tomato thing?
Well, what it means is that if you are unfamiliar with a particular technology, if it is so far beyond your comprehension that you are in a position where that technology is indistinguishable from magic. You have no way to comprehend it. And so if somebody took a cell phone back to the Dark Ages, granted there'd be no tower for anybody to call, but if you still had power and you could pull up whatever game you were playing and piddle around on it and touch and do stuff like that, to them it would appear to be magic because they are missing so many steps in the foundation of understanding that technology that it to them is magic.
But in principle, something like that in principle could be understood by a human brain.
Sure, and what kind of touches on what Don was talking about. If we hadn't lost the library at Alexandria and other things, that we might have had integral calculus, a millennia earlier, and how much further along would we be? And so I don't think that that in this short period of time, let's say 2,000 years, that our brains have evolved dramatically. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't go back in time, if it's possible, and teach first century people how to do about the technologies that we now understand.
Well, I think the first time I heard it, I kind of just jumped to the conclusion of imagining some other type of alien species. And so I guess what kind of made it stick in my head was if the species is so much more advanced than us that, it's the difference between, say, us and some kind of a monkey maybe, then if we can't understand the technology, if our minds are not capable of understanding it, then that's kind of creates a opens up a really big hole in the sense that how can you say that something is not supernatural if you can't grasp the aspect of it?
The burden of proof is on somebody claiming something is supernatural to prove that it is.
Sure, absolutely. But I think what I'm saying is that if you're dealing with an alien species who you can't even grasp their thinking and their perspective, then the technology itself, if it can't in principle even be understood by a human brain, then it seems to have created
we're sort of there now, right? In the sense that there's lots of areas of science where there's mysteries and unsolved problems and things that we just can't explain. And the right answer is we don't know, or we're looking into it, or we're trying to figure it out. That's the right answer.
The right answer doesn't become, it's supernatural, until you can actually demonstrate a supernatural cause, which, by the way, you can't.
Right, but would that, at that point, is it really appropriate to say that there's no difference between that and a miracle? Because that seems like it's not a miracle.
So a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. It would certainly be the case that people who don't understand it might perceive it as a miracle and may even label it as a miracle, but they would in fact be wrong.
So what about in these scenarios people create of simulations? In other words, if it's some kind of a simulation like a computer game and you're violating, like a programmer can violate the kind of the physics laws of the simulation. So in that sense, he's kind of violating, it's kind of not natural, it's violating the physics of the game, but at the same time, it's taking the whole picture in, it's not irrational.
I don't know what you're asking.
Well, I think he's talking about like Easter eggs in games where you can jump to the next level and these sorts of...
Well, yeah, well, I'm saying like if you take like a Matrix type reality, in other words, there's a physics to the way it works normally. But you could go in and you could change...
Yeah, I understood that part. I don't know what your question is.
My question is, would that, if the game world, universe has a physics to it, and you're able to violate those, then is that supernatural?
Sure.
From the perspective of inside the game, sure.
Exactly, yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying.
But you'd have no way of actually demonstrating that.
Right. Okay, and I found a way to ask my other question without getting into the other... I can ask it in a more basic way. The thing is that my experience with religion has been that as far as people in my family know, I'm an atheist because it's just easier that way because they're not interested in the more nuanced philosophical aspects anyway.
Okay.
And I'm also I like what you guys do. I'm one of the people who's always posting and liking the atheist posts because of all the good points they make and stuff. But when it comes to I get really hung up on some of the more philosophical definitions of God, so that I find myself kind of, when I'm asked to just conclusively say that there's not a God.
Why would you ever do that?
Excuse me?
Why would you do that? So first,
why would I do what?
Conclusively say that there is no God. Have you concluded this?
No, or to put it another way, if somebody were to ask me, do you believe that there's a God, I have to say that I kind of, a lot, especially on some of these certain philosophical definitions of it, it's the furthest thing from any kind of a God that I would know through religion, really,
right.
Or any kind of a, but I still feel kind of like
you're on the right track.
Say yes.
You're on the right track in the sense that, your next question should be define what you mean by God, right? And if it's some sort of esoteric definition, then it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know. Give me a demonstration of this God. I'm interested. It's also perfectly okay to say this has nothing to do with the religion I grew up with or know anything about. Why are you bringing up this obscure thing?
It's not up to you.
Nobody's bringing it up to me. This is from my own investigating it, and
right.
I got into the whole Spinoza thing because people always bring up Spinoza and Einstein, and
sure.
And I looked
There's
at
about as many definitions of God as there are people. So
sure, and when I looked at it, and some of the ones that I look at, especially the ones that kind of seem to be more likely you're going to find in a Western kind of philosophical or scientific setting, those kind of, sometimes they leave me with a little sense that there's actually something solid there.
Well, of course there's something solid there. When Spinoza and others define a God of the universe, or they define God as being synonymous with the universe, the solid thing that's there is the universe. The problem is that they have no good reason for applying the God label to it.
Well, but Spinoza wasn't a materialist, though, and for me, that's the main way I understand everything is via materialism.
Right, scientific materialism.
And so people, when I came across Spinoza and Bertrand Russell talking about, that they weren't really materialists, but there was this reality, the substance reality had both the mental and the physical aspect. I just thought, this is kind of just blowing everything wide open.
I don't know what you mean that's blowing it. I apologize, but I'm having a real difficult time understanding what your actual problem is, because first of all, it's not up to you to define a God and then refute it, because that path lies straw man.
Sure.
But the other thing is that there's apart from gods that are logically inconsistent, they're logically contradictory, you couldn't claim that there is no God. It's just a matter of not believing it. And so it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Spinoza's God or the Christian God or, some tiki god somewhere, whatever. The burden of proof is on them to demonstrate that it exists. And when somebody talks to you about why you don't believe, you're not in a position where you're asserting that their God is necessarily false. You are in a position of saying, I am not yet convinced that it's true. And that's all that's required.
Well, when I'm in a position to, maybe I'm in a situation where, you've got to kind of say, to be part of something, you've got to say essentially, I don't believe in God. I definitely don't believe in any kind of God. I don't know if I can honestly do that at this point.
Well, that's fine. That's perfectly honest, and there's nothing wrong with that.
But I don't know what the problem is with saying that at all. Do you believe in some God?
I honestly think yeah, that there is.
What kind of God do you believe in?
Well, okay, I mean, that there's, first of all, the idea of, I'm not saying, let me be quick that I'm not saying that any of these are, I'm not standing on any of these arguments or saying I think these are seamless mathematical theorems.
You just said that you just said that you think you believe in a God. All I want to know is what God do you believe in and why?
The God that is, I guess, like the ground of being or the prime mover, kind of that kind of thing.
Why?
I think sometimes it's hard to tell what is the when I look into it. Like I said, I always come out of it thinking, yeah, this kind of sounds. I think I believe this, but it's kind of hard, like to say exactly point for point what are the exact reasons why. I mean, maybe something kind of almost intuitive about it, but I don't I don't lead with that.
So it's compelling at some level to you.
Excuse me?
It's compelling at some level.
Sure.
What's compelling?
The prime mover, the first cause.
The idea that there's I think the word Spinoza used was like the underlying the thing that stands beneath or something.
What on earth makes you think there's a thing that stands beneath? Because to me that phrase is a deepity.
Well, I mean that there's something. In other words, that there's aspects of whether it's first we kind of held that. Before they saw that the universe had an age, it was kind of like, I guess, maybe matter and energy were eternal and they were always there. And now, maybe that's not the case, but maybe there's certain principles or rules.
That's a whole lot of maybes.
Excuse me?
That's a whole lot of maybes. I'm trying to get to actually...
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't get into it. I don't go too far with that's like the thing of, are we living in is this reality real, or is it going to stop all of a sudden?
It seems to me that you are willingly falling prey to shifting the burden of proof. You're basically seem to be implying that, we really don't know, and there could be something like this, and maybe it's like this. That's not the foundation upon which we should believe something. Right. There's a difference between not believing that something is impossible and believing that it's possible, and there's a difference between believing something is possible and believing that it's actually true. And so when I say, do you believe in a God, and you say, well, yeah, kind of, I don't even know what that means.
Okay, well, for instance, if you've got you're trying to decide murder, and they've got the two suspects there, and you got this strong feeling about one of them, and you even after you hear all the arguments, you see the thrust of them, and that they kind of maybe lead to the direction of this is not the guy. But just out of honesty, just sheer honesty, at the end of the day, and that's how I often felt about atheism. When the Christians would get me into all this stuff about what about this, what about that, and
we're getting off track.
Before I had the answers to those things, I would just say, I'm sorry, I don't have all the answers, but I think you guys are wrong. I don't believe Jesus is who you say he is, and no, I can't prove it, but my gut tells me that it's just not.
Let's go to your murder example, because I got other callers and we're getting way off track.
Go for it.
Let's go to your murder example. You've got two suspects. Are you convinced that one of them is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt?
No, not beyond a reasonable doubt.
Then you have to vote not guilty, which means you don't believe.
No. It means that you may believe, but there is a doubt. In other words,
I'm talking about making the decision on whether or not you are convinced that the person is guilty. And that's what I mean by, are you convinced beyond a reasonable doubt?
Well, I think that It's like, is my brother across town getting ready for dinner? Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is because he always is at this time of day. Is there a reasonable doubt? Sure. There's a huge doubt. But my gut says he most likely is.
Okay.
So on that basis, yeah, I kind of think that there's a God thing.
What is the evidence that has convinced you to whatever degree?
The reoccurrence of the thing over and over again.
The reoccurrence of what thing over and over again? That sentence was devoid of content.
The reoccurrence of this God idea thing that is that comes before our reality and is preeminent.
So there's a reoccurrence of ideas of alien visitors and Bigfoot. Does that mean it's reasonable to believe that?
Well, I don't think that alien visitors and Bigfoot are reoccurrent so much throughout history. And also, I think that it's weird the way the God thing persists into science.
So is it more reasonable that people have come up with this God as a gap filler to things that we don't understand through an error in reasoning, or that it's actually true?
I would think that it's actually true. Because
Why?
we have the rules of logic and everything now, and, you know, even people like Gödel and those, Gödel believed in God. And
I'm sorry, this is starting to sound like you tossing out as many things that sound significant as you can come up with and making no actual case.
Exactly. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if it adds up to a case or not, but enough people over when all the people kind of add together, it starts to get, Hey, the bigger question.
So you think that it's a reliable mechanism to truth, to determine beliefs, is to figure out how many people have repeatedly come up with a particular idea, like let's say that the Earth is flat, which was something that virtually everybody believed right up until the time it was proved wrong, and it was.
That's not really when.
Go read a
book.
Was it? Yeah. All right.
Well, let me say something more constructive.
Sure.
There's a lot to be gained, I think, from learning about logical fallacies and practicing them in your thinking and reading and critical thought. That's made me smarter doing that, and you're less likely to be conned and these sorts of things, and that's good stuff. And I detect some whiffs of logical fallacies in there, and I think that if you're more comfortable with that knowledge and more confident of those things, then you could throw away a lot of these arguments. And
I did throw away a lot of those arguments.
No, I'm talking to the caller.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the reason that there's frustration here is because, to me, in my head, and I could be wrong, the entire summation of that call is, I think maybe I kind of might believe, and maybe I do believe.
He's sitting on the fence.
And it's because of this, and I really don't know why that should be a good reason to believe, and I'm not sure that there is a good reason to believe, but I kind of believe this.
He just needs to crisp up his thinking a bit. So
it's so one of the things is that if you say you believe something, that is a statement that you are convinced that the claim is true or likely true. Right. I mean, that is an expression that you are convinced of this, and you become convinced for good or bad reasons. And the reason that we ask what you believe and why is because we want to get down to, do you have really good reasons for believing something? Because if so, we'd like to be able to join you in believing for good reasons.
There you go.
And if you have bad reasons, or you can't express reasons, or you can't even really, put into words what it is that you believe, and even worse, you can't really express why.
Yeah, well, he's been taken in a little bit by the bad reasons, I think, and needs to understand why they're bad reasons.
Well, one of the things that we kind of have come to understand is that we are fallible thinking machines that are pattern recognizing machines that live our lives by inference and induction, and we make mistakes. Yep. And the fact that somebody has repeatedly come up with the idea that there must be a God, I see no reason to think that that's anything more than a repeated mistake, because we still haven't solved the biggest questions of the universe. Why is there something other than nothing? And it's potentially comforting to appeal to this universal grounding.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that it's reasonable to believe. It doesn't mean it's true. And when you start appealing to, so many people have come up with this idea over and over again.
I don't think that was the only reason he had, but it was certainly among the bad ones. Let's go on to another caller.
All right. Artie in Charlotte, North Carolina, how are you?
Oh, good. How are you guys doing?
Good.
We're
What's
hot.
Up?
It's really hot.
Yeah, it's hot in here.
Oh, it's hot.
We got a glow going. I'm sure you can see that. Anyway, go ahead. What you got for us?
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. My mom is a minister, a Methodist minister, and I'm an atheist, so and a skeptic. But she said that one night at a meeting, her and her husband were at this church board meeting, and they witnessed spiritual warfare. Mm-hmm. And like the whole room went crazy, like a Stanley Kubrick movie, like The Shining. Like one dude's face, who was sitting at the table where they were, he aged like 100 years, got real wrinkly, and his face hit the table. And there was all this other kinds of real crazy stuff going on in the room. And so my mom was telling me this story, and you know, she's not the kind of person that would, you know, lie about things and like make up stuff.
Sure.
And her husband was there too, and he was also saying, yes, all this stuff happened. You know, their stories were slightly different. Like there was a lady in the room with bleach blonde hair, but then according to my stepdad, she had jet black hair. So just weird little things like that. And then at one point, my mom stood up and said something like, "In the name of Jesus, get out of here," or something like that. And then supposedly everything went back to normal.
Well, that rules out an acid trip, because I don't care how much you yell. That stuff's not going to stop for 12 or 14 hours.
Yeah.
So one of the things is that I'd ask is, you know, between the time this happened and the time that they told you about it, I'm assuming that, like normal people, they spoke to each other about it.
Right.
And it would seem to me that when two people experience something and they begin to discuss it, that their accounts are going to begin to merge, that this is natural as they reinforce the parts of each other's story that they already believed and then amplify it. We know that the construction of memories of events is horribly flawed in this sense, and which is one of the reasons why we don't just merely trust an eyewitness account.
Right.
Your mom's going to be upset because you don't believe her. And what you should say is that you believe that your mom experienced something, that she is honestly relaying information to you about what she thinks happened. You just don't believe her explanation or the specifics of the account because you don't have evidence for the explanation and the specifics of the account.
Right.
Account.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, that was actually basically you actually answered the question.
That's what they pay me for.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. It's hot in here. I'm surly.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult situation. I mean, I got a letter from my mom where she was telling me, you know, that Jesus loves you, et cetera, blah, 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 blah. And she ends it off with, you know, your mom wouldn't lie to you. And I didn't think my mom was lying. I thought my mom was honestly portraying what she believed to be true. I just don't happen to believe that what she thinks is true is actually true. And it's not an attack on my mom's character or anything else. I think that she's just as fallible as anybody else.
Sure.
And I think that given this account, the way we would go about trying to figure out what happened is something that we can't do because we can't recreate the event. And there are weird accounts like this all over the place. Matter of fact, there's a 19th century book called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And I should remember the author's name, but I can't. Somebody know it? Nobody in the audience
knows it?
knows
Quite an old book, pretty well known.
All right, so I'm the only 19th century guy in the room. But it's a really good look at this, and there's a number of really good skeptic resources that address accounts like this. You see the mass, sometimes they're reported as like mass hallucinations, or even somebody will throw out hypnosis. I wouldn't go so far as that. I wouldn't even begin to posit what the explanation is likely to be. It's okay, though, to say that there are accounts of this outside of Christianity, for example, where groups of people have experienced something and reported it. You can go to talk to people about their group alien abduction. I don't believe them,
right?
But they're going to give you information.
On the memory thing, I'm reminded of a study that a professor did with his students on the Challenger disaster. Right after it, this was years ago, he asked them to recall and write down what they had done, what they were doing during when they first heard about the Challenger disaster, and he saved those papers and did the same question with the same group of people a couple of years later, and they wrote something completely different. And then when the students were confronted with what they had written before, they were convinced that it was a forgery, because the new memories, which were probably wrong since they were later massaged and constructed, the new memories had so much power in their minds over what was happening really much closer to the event. So I'd be more inclined to trust the account right at the event. So there's all sorts of problems here.
And while I said there's no reason to kind of posit explanations, it's okay to just say we don't know. I'd have somebody check for a gas leak.
Yeah, well, that's true too. Yeah.
I mean,
fine idea.
It can't hurt to check.
Might
but
help.
Maybe somebody spiked a drink, threw some salvia into the punch or something. I don't know if you can get that kind of. I don't know if you have. I don't know enough about the drug to know, but it doesn't even have to be a drug or anything else, because when you watch, if you go to like Pentecostal churches,
Yeah.
there are amazing things that happen, and people experience things, and especially in the pew jumping, flailing on the ground, speaking in tongues. This
That's
sort
the
of
hysterical.
what's that?
That's the hysterical thing.
Yes,
Definitely.
It's
yeah.
the sort
Mass
of thing
hysteria.
that was talked about in the book that I mentioned, where there's a great experiment that I saw where somebody gets onto an elevator, and everybody else that's on the elevator is paid. And this is the one person who's not paid, gets on the elevator, and everybody in the elevator turns around and faces the back wall. And they film this, and eventually, almost everybody who gets on there will just go with the crowd and turn around and face the back wall so that they're facing away from the door. There's absolutely no reason for this. It's silly. But because everybody else is doing it, they do. We know that human behavior is something that is easily manipulated, and that in order to avoid appearing to be the oddball, people are going to go along with all sorts of things. Is it Milgram experiments where they were shocking people and figuring out just how much shock they're going to give them? These things go against what people thought
charismatic person can convince someone. Yeah,
the Catholic Church has got supposed video footage of exorcisms, and I bet if they didn't have the video footage, where you could look at the video and see that there was no demon face popping out of the individual, that those accounts would have included descriptions like that, as others have in the past. But in any case, the bigger point is that it's not that you think your mom's lying, it's that you don't have any good reason to think that her account of what happened is accurate.
Yeah, I was just amazed at how detailed everything was. Like, I mean, I won't go into the whole, everything that she said happened, but I mean, it kind of made you wonder, like the one guy's face at the table, then there was another lady who was waving her hands around in the air, like, and then everybody in the room started waving their hands around in the air, and all kinds of like really wacky, like acid trippy kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And anyway, it was just bizarre. And so I'm sitting there listening to my mom going, "Okay, Mom, yeah." And I wanted to say, "Yes, I believe you," because I wanted, because I love her and I didn't want her to feel bad. But
sure.
At the same time, I'm like, this is nuts.
The big thing is to point out that there's a difference between thinking that somebody's wrong and thinking that they're lying. But the other thing is you could just go with her.
Yeah.
Go with her. Keep going to these things over and over again and see if they can reproduce it at all. If they're unable to reproduce it with you around, well, that would be curious, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, maybe you have some incredible psychic power that blocks demons.
Maybe he's just as suggestible as anybody else. So take a video camera.
Yeah. And don't rely on your own report. But thanks for the call, Artie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys very much. Have a good weekend.
Sure, you too. Yeah, it's like Memorial Day weekend here in the U.S., so a lot of people have a 3-day weekend. So our studio audience is more full than normal, which is great. Okay, this one's going to be Monroe in Dodge City, Kansas.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Pretty well.
The question that I had, just to be brief with the explanation, I have what could be best described as a type of schizophrenia. I've spoken to several different psychologists, and some have said it's a schizophrenia, some have said it's multiple personality disorder, and I would like to consider myself an intellectual, so I'm able to very well understand it, which I've had some psychologists say that it's incredibly rare for a person to be able to self-recognize mental disorder. And the major problem, I guess you could say, that's arisen from this, or has arisen from this, is that one of my personalities has a claim. I know this is sounding ridiculously crazy, but I'm going to bring it back home. And the claim that this specific individual has, I believe, but I know that it can't be true because there's no, it's unfalsifiable. There is no way to prove it. There's no way to disprove it. And it's a personal belief that I have. I have talked to people about it. I actually have met other people who have similar conditions to mine. But I was wondering, is it fundamentally wrong to believe something even if you know that it cannot, or you are fairly certain that it cannot be true?
So you kind of undermined both of my responses, both by pointing out that you have a type of schizophrenia, and also when you changed it from no to are somewhat certain. So I would say that not only is it wrong, it's impossible to believe something that you know to be false, because that's a contradiction. In most situations, setting aside multiple personalities, etc., I could certainly see a case where one personality believes one thing and one personality believes another. But for a single agent, a single individual, to simultaneously believe that something is true and know that it is false is a contradiction that I can only get out of by saying that somewhere here there's an equivocation fallacy, that what you mean is not two contradictory things about the same discrete proposition. It's like, I believe X when I know something kind of like X isn't true. It's kind of what I'm saying. It'd be helpful if we had the actual belief. I don't know if you want to say what it is.
So I think a lot of what you're saying is based on a rational mind, right? A rational mind can't do this, right, or shouldn't do this. They should question that contradiction and arrive at one or the other, right? But an irrational mind, there's a lot of irrationality in the world, and there's people of that are torn between two different things.
Well, this is what I mean by the discrete belief.
Yeah.
Because setting aside whether or not you're actually rational, and the idea of cognitive dissonance kind of plays into this. Mm-hmm. But I'm convinced that it is impossible for someone to both believe and not believe the same thing at the same time in the same way, that there is a contradiction there. It's very easy to profess belief while you don't believe, or to believe while you profess your disbelief. But I don't see any path that the paths out of this are for there to be an equivocation fallacy, where the two things are not quite the same, or not the same in the same way at the same time.
Since I gave a nickname, and I'm a truck driver and I'm constantly moving, so I won't be in this same location 2 days from now, I don't have a problem actually stating what the belief is. Okay. But it's the predominant personality that I've had as far back as I can remember. Back when I was 6 and 7 years old, I remember this personality. And it is made the claim that it is an extra-dimensional being, which automatically brings up quite a bit of skepticism. But it's an extra-dimensional being that is not physically embodied in its personal realm, but in our physical realm, it and beings like it find quote-unquote hosts, human hosts, and they dwell within the subconscious, only manifesting if the person is psychologically and intellectually capable of accepting that.
Okay, how is it that I can understand this is the claim and that you or some personality believes it. How is it that you know that that's not true?
Well, when I look at it logically, if there's a claim that someone makes that is absolutely unfalsifiable, which this one is, because we're dealing with an extra-dimensional being.
That doesn't tell you whether or not it's true. Unfalsifiable does not mean false. Unfalsifiable means you cannot tell whether or not it's true. And so the actual conclusion is that you don't know that it's not true.
Okay.
You're convinced.
Say it more simply if
Sure.
you can.
You are convinced that, okay, if something's unfalsifiable, then we cannot determine whether or not it's true. And so when you say that you believe it, but that you know it's not true, the part of that that is problematic then is saying that you know it's not true, because you have no way to know whether it's true or not.
One can be skeptical about it.
Yeah, you can intuit that this is unlikely or that it doesn't make sense or anything. You know, you can have things along those lines, but you have no way of knowing that it's not true. But that's a shifting of the burden of proof, because the burden of proof is on the claim that it is true.
Okay.
So it's not problematic to, well, I would say that you shouldn't believe this, because by virtue of it being unfalsifiable, you have no reason to accept it, and you have no reason, no justification to say that it's false. But a proper application of the burden of proof would say that you should not believe this until the burden of proof's been met. So while one of your personalities has a claim, it seemed to me that the rational position would be that, okay, that's your claim. I don't yet believe it because you haven't produced evidence to convince me. It's not the position that that's just false.
I guess the reason that I still believe it, or that I'm having conflict with believing it, is that it's like indoctrination. I was raised up as Southern Independent Baptist, and so I'm very familiar with that. You're taught this from the moment you can perceive pretty much anything, and when you get older, it's hard to let go of it. It's the whole recovering from religion issue.
Sure.
I was raised up in this, and I was made to believe it was absolutely true. So now that I'm challenging it, I'm having personal issues being able to accept it as being false, even though I have evidence that, or even though it hasn't presented evidence that it's true.
Yeah, and see this, the subtle little thing that you said in there that kind of betrays the problem is that you're having difficulty accepting that it's false. And this is a problem. This is a big problem with the burden of proof, is that once somebody's become convinced of something, there's an implicit and still fallacious shifting of the burden of proof, because I now believe this, and so now the onus is on everybody else to prove it wrong, because we've accepted it, and we are convinced that we've accepted it for good reasons, well, even if we know that it was just indoctrination. And so from our point of view, it's up to somebody to prove this false. And the key thing to grasp about skepticism is that you need to recognize when this is happening and say, wait a minute, I am unfairly shifting the burden of proof. I am saying I'm going to keep believing this until somebody proves me false, and this is itself a fallacy. And because of that, I'm going to have to let go of this belief. I have no choice but to let go of it until such time as it actually demonstrates and meets the burden of proof. That makes sense?
Okay.
It's difficult to do. We are all horrible at it. We are prone.
It takes practice, right?
We are in love with ourselves and what we think more than anything.
Confirmation bias.
And as soon as you've expressed a view out loud, you're more likely to defend it. You're more likely to defend it more robustly.
And the smarter you are, the better you are doing the mind games.
And in your situation, where you may also be dealing with multiple personalities and schizophrenia, I would imagine that is a type of irrational hell that I can't even fully wrap my head around. And so I think it's just worth it to continually question everything. But there's a great quote from Bertrand Russell, which is, it's a good idea now and then to hang a question mark on things you've long taken for granted. And
beautiful.
I couldn't have come up with anything better than that.
And I have a parting thought for you, if you don't mind. You know, mental illness and creativity kind of go hand in hand. Maybe you can use, since you seem to be fairly grounded, maybe you can use some of this this thought to make some good science fiction or some good stories that maybe will make you some money.
And if not, you can always.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I've been working on a science fiction story for about 6 years now, and now that I'm trucking, I have a lot more time to think, and my girlfriend actually gave me a book to write stuff down in so that I can.
She didn't give you Dianetics,
further
did she?
develop.
Because your
No,
story is.
I think she got an empty book.
Oh, okay.
So good for you.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Stay away from Scientology because you're already primed for accepting
That's
body
right.
thetans.
That's right. Watch out for those thetans. Yeah.
I don't think I'm crazy enough for Scientology. Personalities in total, and believe me, none of the 11 agree with Scientology. That is just,
Awesome.
Okay.
That's insane.
You've got a quorum. Thanks for calling, Monroe.
Take care.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate what you had to say. Y'all have a good day.
Drive safe. All right, we got Brian in Chicago. Thanks for waiting. We've only got a few minutes left. I apologize. You called towards the end of the show. Hopefully we have enough time.
Okay, I just wanted to get to the point real quick.
Okay.
My brother called a few months ago and was completely convinced by you guys and loves you guys. Has been making me watch your videos. And I'm a pastor of a small little church here in Chicago, and he's been begging me to call. So my point is that I disagree with your whole burden of proof thing, because the way I see it is God has written himself on everyone's heart. And you've probably heard the anecdote of the guy in a boat, and another boat comes by and he says he's waiting on God to save him.
Yeah, sure. I sent you a boat, a helicopter, etc. Why are you here? I got it.
I hate that story.
Exactly.
Here's
that story
the thing.
That story represents the Bible perfectly.
Well, I kind of, I guess I'm just going to have to, I was also, I mean, it says here you were Southern Baptist. I was Southern Baptist in St. Louis area and actually worked with some churches in Illinois, although not all the way out in Chicago. So you disagree because you're convinced, probably because of Romans 1, that everybody knows that God exists.
Yes.
Yeah. Why do you believe Romans 1?
Because it's the Bible.
Okay, why do you believe the Bible?
I wasn't necessarily prepared for that particular question.
You're a preacher and you're not prepared for a question on why you believe the Bible? I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just, I mean, this to me is like the basics. Why would anybody believe, why should I care what the Bible has to say?
The reason why I'm not prepared for that particular question is because you didn't answer what I had to say.
I'm sorry.
Very poignant.
I might have missed a question. What was the question? Because all I heard was you saying you disagreed.
I was trying to make a point to you. It wasn't necessarily a question. My point was...
Well, then how can you accuse me of not answering your question if you didn't ask a question? Your point is that everybody knows that God exists, and I don't agree with that. And I'm asking you to prove that it's true.
It's not about proving that it's true. You
we
never prove that it's true.
Then we are in an impasse. And thank you for acknowledging that you can never prove it's true, which demonstrates it's irrational. I'm going to have to ask you to call back because we've run out of time. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend, and I will be out next week because of the debate, but somebody will be here.
Okay. Thanks.
I agree with you that you cannot prove that it's true, but I believe it anyway. Wow. And I'm the one that's... Next on Geraldo.
Did you want to take some after?
Yeah, let me do this. Mark in Springfield.
Okay, we're going to take some after calls.
Hello,
Is this Mark in Springfield?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
And your question was,
Okay.
was the United States ever a Christian nation?
No.
That's what I'm trying to find out.
The answer is no.
That's what I would figure.
Yeah. And actually, if you can find it, there's a December 2004 edition of Mother Jones magazine, I think, covers this whole thing with a whole bunch of authors doing a whole bunch of historical research in very good detail. But the short answer is no. From the very beginning, while there were Christians, every time during the Continental Congress that somebody tried to vote God in, it was voted down. The Treaty of Tripoli expressly points out that the United States is not a Christian nation. The Constitution doesn't mention God or religion in any sense other than prohibiting religious tests for office. There's nothing Christian about it.
But what about
I'm just talking whatever, because I felt very much the same way. But it's in trying to argue that point with people that I find myself coming into questions I'm not conditioned for, I guess.
So here's one thing. If you haven't actually bothered to dig in and be ready for all the questions, one of the things you can do is say, what difference would it make if the United States used to be a Christian nation? Because while the founding fathers were awesome and they built a great secular nation, the first one the world had ever seen, and that this is generally recognized, and anybody who spends some time studying can figure this out.
Widely copied.
We are not beholden to what the founders thought. In much the same way that the founders were okay with slavery, we've changed to where we no longer permit slavery. And so even if the founders thought that this should be a Christian nation, the question really is, should it be a Christian nation, not whether or not somebody thought it was or whether it was. The question should be about how best to go about the nation's business.
I understand that, Matt. And actually, I heard that in a video with your debate against Abu Murray earlier today.
Yeah.
I thought that was an awesome quote.
Thanks.
But,
and they're tearing down the studio, so I gotta let you go.
Okay. Can I just shoot one more question at you?
You can.
Have you ever read John Fay's book, Was America Founded on a Christian Nation?
Whose book?
John Fay, F-E-A.
No.
Okay, just thought I'd throw it off you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
There's a lot of good resources on that question, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Okay.